I apologize for that. But once again, welcome to the Los Angeles Birders webinar for tonight. We have a wonderful, wonderful webinar in store. But before I get there, I want to thank everyone who is a member of Los Angeles Birders. You are the community that helps us be a strong organization presenting webinars like this, storing and making available those webinars. We have many community service projects that we have done and are coming down the pike, something to look forward to. We have wonderful field trips and pelagic trips and a great community for you to take advantage of. Besides of which, we have a wonderful student section, LA's Bird students. And all of this is possible through your support and your help. So please join if you're not a member, and please consider being a life member if you are a member. And with that, I'd like to introduce Alex once again, who will introduce our speaker for tonight. Alex?
Thank you, Ron. We are honored to have Dessi Sieburth with us this evening. Desi's passion for birds began at the age of 8, sparked by building a bird feeder during a Cub Scout woodworking project. By age 11, he was deeply immersed in birding, sketching, photography, and studying every field guide and bird book he could find. His dedication led him to compete in the American Birding Association's Young Birder of the Year contest in 2015, where he earned the prestigious title after just one attempt. By the time Desi graduated from high school, he had already made significant contributions to ornithology, publishing articles in respected peer-reviewed journals such as Ornithology and Western Birds. More recently, he's expanded his birding horizons to the incredible diversity of neotropical species, traveling extensively across Central and South America, with aspirations to explore avian biodiversity in Asia. Desi is a graduate of Stanford University, the Christmas Bird Count, or CBC, compiler for California, and is a valued board member of Los Angeles Birders. His dedication and accomplishments in the field of ornithology are truly inspiring, and we are privileged to have him here with us tonight. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dessi Sieburth.
Thank you, Alex, for that wonderful introduction. Really appreciate it. I'll just share my screen here. Might take a minute to load.
There you go. You're all set.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, thanks again, Alex, for that fantastic introduction. And let's get into the identification of dabbling ducks. So before we begin, I just wanted to quickly plug Doug Robinson's webinar. Doug gave a talk several months ago to Los Angeles birders titled "Why All the Summer Ducks Are Brown and What to Do About It." So yeah, if you're curious why all the summer ducks are brown and want to learn more about the identification of these ducks and go and dabble a little bit into diving ducks, then certainly check out his webinar. I think there's quite a bit of overlap between both our webinars, but hopefully you can get something new from each of them. But today, I want to go more into what to do about it. So go further into the identification of these dabbling ducks. So what is a dabbling duck? A dabbling duck is just a term that birders use to describe ducks that feed at the surface of the water. Here we see a classic example of a dabbling duck with this pair of mallards. They feed by often kind of tipping their vents up in the air and submerging their head underwater. And dabbling ducks are in contrast to the other main group of ducks we have, which are the diving ducks. This common goldeneye here, for example, is a diving duck, and they feed by diving completely underwater and then using their feet to run around or to swim around. So yeah, dabbling ducks do not really dive under the surface. So how do we identify these dabbling ducks? Well, the good news is that the identification of males at most times of year is pretty straightforward. Many of you probably know why I say most times of year, but if not, we'll get to that pretty soon. But the point is that males during a lot of the year are just striking and unmistakable. So here we have the three species of teal that occur regularly in the county: cinnamon, blue-winged, and green-winged. And you can see there's really no identification issue. So if you see a duck you don't know, You can often just look next to it, and there'll usually be a bright male duck, right there, that you can compare it with. The problem, however, is that the identification of females, as well as males in late summer and early fall, is much more difficult. So here we have those same three species of teal that we saw in the previous slide: cinnamon, blue-winged, and green-winged. And you can see how similar they look to each other. And this is true of a lot of female plumage dabbling ducks. They're all kind of shades of mottled brown, without too much pattern or color, which makes the identification tricky. So what is going on with these male dabbling ducks in late summer and early fall? So during this time, male ducks will attain female-like plumage, which we call the eclipse plumage of ducks. So for example, take this mallard here. This is a male mallard in basic plumage. This is what we see at most times of year, with that nice green head, a white ring around the neck. In late summer and early fall, however, the mallard will molt its feathers into something that looks like this. It looks very similar to what a female mallard looks like. But of course, note that bright yellow bill that characterizes this bird as a male. Because the bills, of course, aren't replaced. It's only the feathers that are replaced. And if you're curious why ducks have this kind of extra eclipse plumage, Doug Robinson in his webinar goes into a lot more detail. But the short of it is that ducks molt all their flight feathers at once, which leaves them flightless for a period of several weeks. And, obviously, if you're flightless, you don't want to have all sorts of bright colorations that predators can easily see. You want to be kind of a mottled brown and blend in with your surroundings. So, during that molt, they molt into their eclipse plumage where they're kind of brownish. And then once that molt is complete and they're able to fly again, then they molt back into their nice, bright, colorful plumage. So let's get into the identification of these ducks. We have 12 species of native dabbling ducks that have occurred in Los Angeles County. You can see them here on the slide. This is not in taxonomic order. This is just in the order I'm going to talk about them, the order I thought made most sense for discussing ID. So yeah, these 12 species are the wood duck, the mallard, the gadwall, the northern pintail, the northern shoveler, the blue-winged teal, the cinnamon teal, the green-winged teal, the Eurasian widgeon, the American widgeon, the Mexican duck, and the gargany. So let's get into it. All right, let's start with the wood duck. The wood duck is pretty uncommon in Los Angeles County. It's a very local, non-breeding visitor, and an occasional breeder to small ponds, parks, and wooded streams. So yeah, they really like very woody, swampy habitat because they're actually cavity nesters. So, they need like really tall trees to make their nests. The wood duck is pretty much unmistakable in all plumages. The male, obviously, is just an incredible assortment of colors with that green head, red eye ring, red bill, etc. The female is kind of brownish overall, but still very easily identifiable by that wispy crest in the back of the head, the white eye ring, the very short bill, and the female still has some blue in the wing. There is one identification issue with the wood duck, however, and that's to beware of escaping mandarin ducks. So the mandarin duck is regular as an escapee throughout the Los Angeles basin. And they occasionally show up in very odd places. There's a couple records for Lancaster, and there's even a record for Death Valley at the Furnace Creek Golf Course. How that bird got there, I have no idea. But, clearly they can show up anywhere. And it's definitely, a bird to have in the back of your mind whenever you're seeing a wood duck. So how can we tell apart wood duck and mandarin duck? So here we have a female wood duck on the left and a female mandarin duck on the right. And probably the best way to tell these two species apart is to look at the eye ring. The mandarin duck has a thinner eye ring and a longer white line extending behind the eye. So, here we kind of, see that kind of thin white eye ring on the mandarin and that long line extending behind the eye ring, which is much shorter on the wood duck. There's other marks as well. Note the kind of the indistinct streaking in the cheek of the mandarin duck, while the cheek of the wood duck is just a solid gray color. Um, yeah, also note that a mandarin duck averages bolder spotting on the underparts, but this is a low variable, and mandarin duck also averages more white in the wing. Yeah, really looking at that eye ring is the best way to tell these two species apart. So moving on to the mallard. The mallard is the common dabbling duck in just about every aquatic habitat at all seasons. They're absolutely ubiquitous. Just really anywhere where there's water, there's probably mallards or several hundred mallards. The male mallard in basic plumage is quite unmistakable with that nice green head, a bright yellow bill, and white ring around the neck. And the female mallard, like most other ducks, is kind of a mottled brown overall. And we'll get into how to separate mallard from other ducks in a little bit. But for now, let's talk about the gadwall. The gadwall is widespread in a variety of aquatic habitats, but typically less numerous than mallards. Similar habitats, but generally a little less numerous than mallard. They're also a local breeder in the Antelope Valley, in the wetlands out there, places like Paiute Ponds, Quail Lake, etc. The male gadwall here on the left is a very distinct duck with that nice grayish coloration, that black vent. And the female, like a lot of other ducks, is kind of a mottled brown, and is quite similar in appearance and size to the mallard. So let's compare the gadwall and the mallard to get familiar with how to separate these two. Probably one of the best ways to tell apart a gadwall and a mallard female is to watch it fly, because the identification is not much of an issue in flight. The gadwall, which is here on the left, has this white speculum. The speculum is just a term we use in ducks to refer to the secondaries. And you can see those inner secondaries of the gadwall are bright white and contrast really nicely with the rest of the wing. In mallard, those same feathers are kind of purplish, sometimes kind of bluish or even entirely dark under certain lights. But that nice purplish color surrounded by two white bars on either side of it. Very different wing pattern. However, the speculum is often not visible when the birds are swimming, so it's certainly good to know other marks as well. Yeah, so I would say, first of all, the shape of these two ducks is a little different. The gadwall has a thinner, longer neck. In the mallard, it looks like that head is just kind of plopped right onto the body. There's not really much of a neck. Well, on the gadwall, that neck really does show. The gadwall also has a paler head that contrasts more with the breast compared to kind of the darker head of the mallard. And gadwall also has a less distinct eye line. On mallard, that eye line is usually very distinct and goes on both sides of the eye, while on gadwall, that's generally less bold. And finally, I just wanted to point out that this feather here on the mallard, this wing feather, that's one of the tertials. And on mallard, that tertial feather is usually really exposed. It looks huge on the wing, just dwarfs the other feathers. And it's usually a different color. It's usually kind of brownish to grayish or even silvery in color. And it really sticks out on the wing. While on the gadwall, that feather is more similar in color to the rest of the wing and covered up by a lot of the wing, by a lot of the other wing feathers. So yeah, that's a good mark to know as well. And bill color is also different, although bill color is really variable in ducks and depends a lot on age and sex, etc. So it's not the most reliable mark, but gadwall certainly does average more yellow in the bill than a female mallard. Here's another comparison with gadwall on the left and mallard on the right. Again, note that really bright silvery tertial on the mallard that just really sticks out from the rest of the wing, while that feather, is covered up by a lot of the other feathers on the gadwall. Also note the kind of buffy throat on the mallard. That buffy throat kind of contrasts with the rest of the neck and the rest of the head. While on gadwall, that throat is just kind of the same color as the head. There's no real contrast there. And yeah, again, just to show how variable bill color is, here's a gadwall with a fairly dark bill. So yeah, bill color is quite variable. Yeah, finally, just note the white belly of the gadwall. This can be very useful when the birds are sleeping at a distance or standing up. That white belly really stands out. While on the mallard, that belly is just entirely dark. Moving on to the Northern Pintail. The Northern Pintail is a fairly common non-breeding visitor, with fall migrants usually arriving as early August and leaving as most having left by late March. And they occasionally oversummer at places like Paiute Ponds and the LA River. And there's at least one breeding record from Paiute Ponds in Lancaster. On the left here is the male Northern Pintail. Truly just a beautiful duck. Absolutely unmistakable with that really long tail and a nice brownish head. The female is also quite distinctive for a dabbling duck. It's kind of this pale tannish coloration, much paler than other ducks. Here's a distant pintail, just to get more familiar with it. Yeah, the first thing to note on the pintail, just a really large size, like just really long overall. This is a green-winged teal that it's with on the right, and it just absolutely dwarfs the green-winged teal. So this is certainly our largest dabbling duck. Also note the very long neck of the pintail, much longer neck than other ducks. And note the silvery bill on this bird. Recall from the previous slide that the male has a silvery bill and the female kind of has a dark bill. So that means this bird is an eclipse male and not a female due to that nice silvery bill. And then finally, just note that really pale tan overall coloration, much paler than other ducks. In flight, note the dark speculum that does not contrast greatly with the rest of the wing. So yeah, again, the speculum is just a term we use for ducks to refer to their secondaries. And in pintail, if you look at it really closely, like it definitely is green, but at a distance when you're watching it in the field, it usually just appears kind of dark. And this just gives the wing a very uniform appearance, kind of an entirely brown wing without too much going on. Moving on to the shoveler. The shoveler is a common to sometimes just absolutely abundant non-breeding visitor, with fall migrants arriving as early August, and most having left by late April. And there's places where where shovelers can just be completely abundant. At Paiute Ponds, for example, it's by far the most common duck, and you can often see thousands or even tens of thousands of shovelers at Paiute Ponds. And the species has nested at Paiute Ponds as well before. Probably the most obvious feature of the shoveler is that huge spatula-shaped bill, very distinct and much larger than any other duck. The male shoveler has that nice green head, yellow eye, white breast, and reddish flanks. The female is, like other ducks, very mottled brown overall, but thankfully it still has that very distinct huge bill that's spatula-shaped. Here's a northern shoveler in flight. And yeah, note the mottled blue lesser coverts that are bordered by white. So this area here, kind of the shoulder area, those are the lesser coverts. And yeah, they're bordered by this thick white bar, and they're kind of this kind of dull blue coloration. This is very similar in pattern to like a blue-winged or a cinnamon teal, but we'll get into how they differ a little later. Moving on to the cinnamon teal. The cinnamon teal is a fairly common non-breeding visitor and a local breeder at freshwater wetlands, places like Paiute Ponds, the LA River, the San Gabriel River, etc. The male is this nice chestnut color overall. This is also a pretty small duck, but still very distinct with that really nice chestnut color and red eye. The female, like other ducks, is this very much mottled brown. And yeah, we'll take a look at how to separate cinnamon teal from other ducks in a little bit. I just wanted to mention that there's a lot of variation in bill size in a cinnamon teal. And some cinnamon teals can be very large-billed, which might recall a northern shoveler. So here on the left, we have a pretty large-billed cinnamon teal. And you might, if you saw that bird by itself and didn't have a great gauge of size, obviously cinnamon teals are much smaller than shovelers. But if you don't have a great gauge of size, that can be hard to judge. And the bill looks pretty big. But once you see the real shoveler, there's no mistaking it. That bill is just so much bigger on the shoveler and much more spatula shaped. Also note that the bill of the shoveler often has significant orange or yellow tones in it, while the bill of the cinnamon teal is generally entirely or almost entirely dark. So if you're seeing a ton of yellow in the bill, that's not a cinnamon teal. Here's another example of a particularly large build, a cinnamon teal here on the left. And again, you might confuse this for a northern shoveler if you just kind of saw it on its own. But again, that bill is not spatula shaped. It is big, but it's not spatula shaped. And also, the bill on the cinnamon teal is entirely dark. There's no yellow or orange on it. And finally, note the difference in the color of the lesser coverts, in the color of that shoulder patch. In cinnamon teal, it's a very bright blue, kind of this nice powder blue and completely solid. In northern shoveler, it's a much duller blue, almost more of a blue-gray. So yeah, that's a great way to tell them apart in flight as well. Look for that nice bright blue shoulder of the cinnamon teal. All right, let's move on to the blue-winged teal. The blue-winged teal is definitely one of our more localized dabbling ducks. Usually, within LA County, you usually do have to go really looking for blue-winged teal to find them. They're really, kind of restricted to places like the San Gabriel spreading grounds, the LA River, or Paiute ponds. And it's very similar in size and shape to cinnamon teal. The male, of course, looks nothing like a cinnamon teal with that nice white crescent between the eye and the bill. That nice reddish coloration on the body that's speckled throughout. The female, can be extremely similar looking to the cinnamon teal. And there's definitely a lot of birds that probably should be left unidentified, between blue-winged and cinnamon teal. But let's try to take a stab at separating blue-winged and cinnamon. So one of the main problems is that cinnamon teal, or both species, but especially cinnamon teal, can be very variable. So all 6 photos here are of cinnamon teal in eclipse male or female plumage. And you can see just the range of color that they show. Some birds, like the ones on the top row, are kind of very reddish overall, have reddish tones or kind of very warm brown tones. And those don't really pose too much of an identification problem in relation to blue-winged teal. The birds on the bottom row, though, are kind of more cold gray, and definitely could be confused with a blue-winged teal. But let's try to make sense of this. So I'd say most, but certainly not all, can be identified using some combination of field marks. So the first field mark I want to talk about is bill size. Oh. Sorry about that. Yeah. So the first mark I want to talk about is bill size. Cinnamon averages slightly larger bill than blue-winged, but bill size is quite variable. So here on the left, I would say we have a very short-billed cinnamon teal, very small build, small petite bill. In the middle, we have a more typical looking blue-winged teal in terms of bill size. And on the right, we have a very large build blue-winged teal. Now, here's what I would kind of call a small build cinnamon teal. Here's what I'd call like a more, typical looking cinnamon teal in terms of bill size. And here's what I'd call a very large build cinnamon teal. So as you can see, there's tons of overlap in bill size. But if you have a bird with a very small bill, a very small short bill like the bird on the top left, that's a great indication you're probably dealing with a blue-winged. Likewise, if you have a bird like on the bottom right, or even bottom middle, that's almost certainly going to be a cinnamon with a bill that big. The overall color is also, there's differences in the averages of that as well. Our cinnamon average is kind of paler, warmer, and usually has some reddish brown tones in the body pattern. So on the left here, we have a blue-winged teal. I would say is like very dark. This is just a textbook classic blue-winged teal. very dark body, contrasts really nicely with the head. This is just a no doubt blue-winged teal here on the left. In the center, we have probably a more average-looking blue-winged teal. It's still pretty cold gray. Not really much reddish tones in there. And on the right here, we have a very reddish looking blue-winged teal. This is probably kind of the reddish extreme of blue-winged teal. And if I saw this bird, I'd probably be inclined to call it a cinnamon teal, in all honesty. But this bird was photographed in a flock of 50 blue-winged teal in the east, where cinnamon teal are very, very rare, and blue-winged teal are very common. So now I assume this is just the reddish extreme of blue-winged teal, which definitely complicates things. So here on the bottom row, on the left here, here's a cinnamon teal that I would say is kind of colder gray than most. This is kind of more approaching the color of a typical blue-winged teal. This is a more typical cinnamon teal here in the middle. Definitely starting to show some reddish tones in the face and across the body. And here's kind of a very reddish cinnamon teal. Lots of red in the face, lots of kind of reddish tones in the body. Just a classic blue-winged teal, or sorry, classic cinnamon teal. So yeah, like bill size, this mark is quite variable. But if you see a bird like on the upper left, that's really dark, and there's tons of contrast with the head and the body, that's a great sign you're dealing with a blue wing. Likewise, if you see a bird like on the bottom right or even bottom middle with lots of cinnamon tones, that's a great sign you're dealing with a cinnamon. There are also differences in head pattern, where the head pattern averages much bolder on blue-winged teal compared to cinnamon teal. And here's what I mean. So on the left here, I would say is a very bold-faced blue-winged teal. There's tons of white in front of the bill, and that white extends down into the throat and the chin. Bold white eye arcs on that left bird. Just a very bold-faced bird. Here in the middle is a more typical blue-winged teal. Still quite a bit of white at the base of the bill that extends down onto the throat and the chin, but not really much hint of an eye arc. And on the right here is a very bland-faced blue-winged teal. Not much going on there. So now looking at the kind of spectrum of the cinnamon teal in this regard, here's kind of a bold-faced cinnamon teal. Again, you can kind of see a little bit of white at the base of the bill, hint of eye arcs. Definitely a very blue-winged teal-like bird in terms of face pattern. Here's a more typical cinnamon teal. And finally, here's like a very bland-faced cinnamon teal. That entire face is just one color. There's hardly anything going on there. So that's like a very obvious cinnamon. So yeah, what specifically can we look for in terms of face pattern? Well, first, I think one thing to look for is the paler overall color to the cheek in blue-winged teal. I think we see this in all three birds here. The cheek and neck just feel paler overall and contrast more with the body in blue-winged teal. Blue-winged teal also averages more white in front at the base of the bill, and this white often extends down into the chin or the throat. So, for example, here on the top row, we see two examples of a blue-winged teal. Not only do they have quite this kind of white coloration at the base of the bill, but that white coloration also extends down into the chin and into the throat. Now, it's not particularly unusual. It's not particularly unusual for a cinnamon teal to show some white at the base of the bill, but that white rarely extends down into the chin and into the throat. As we see even in these bottom birds here. Blue-winged teal also averages a bolder eye line. We see that here, a nice bold eye line. And yeah, nice bold eye line on that top middle bird as well. Blue-winged teal also usually has a darker nape. So there's that dark nape, kind of the crown's a little darker, and that dark crown kind of extends further down the neck onto the nape. In cinnamon teal, that dark crown usually just stops at the top of the crown. It usually doesn't really come down the nape very much. So that's another thing to look for. And finally, if you can get really nice photos or, get a really good look, you can sometimes see this kind of paler area above the supraloral. So here in this top middle bird, you can see that kind of pale area, um, you know, that kind of pale area separating the dark lords and the dark crown. And in bluing, that pale area is often bolder and often extends to the base of the bill, whereas in cinnamon it usually does not. So all these things are variable, but just more things to look at. These teal should always be identified using a combination of field marks. There's no one field mark that'll tell you every single time, but if you look at it enough, you can kind of weigh the marks and usually come to a conclusion. I just wanted to take a brief look at this bird here. So this bird, or no, if I saw this bird here in LA County, I'd probably be inclined to leave it unidentified. I think it does show some aspects of blue-winged teal. It does have like a pretty distinct eye line extending behind the eye, and the cheek is quite pale. So I probably would have called this a blue-wing, but probably best to leave this unidentified. And yeah, leaving teal unidentified is perfectly fine. And here's another bird I'd probably leave unidentified. I think there are signs of a cinnamon teal. It does have a really big bill, and the nape is pretty pale. But on the other hand, it does have white eye arcs. It does have a fairly bold face pattern. So yeah, that's all to say. Leaving teal unidentified is completely fine. Finally, I wanted to touch on one final field mark, and that's a bill color. Yeah, cinnamon teal often has some pale coloration at the base or along the ridge of the bill. So looking at these bottom two bird or this bottom bird here, you can see that this bird kind of has this kind of pale orangish, yellowish coloration along the ridge of the bill, between the upper and the lower mandibles. Here's another example of a cinnamon teal that has that, that nice kind of splotchy yellow coloration along the ridge of the bill. However, like all marks, this is quite variable. Here's an example of a blue-winged teal showing plenty of color in that area as well. So again, this is just like a kind of average mark. There's plenty of birds that show it and don't show it. I will say that it did take me a long time of scrolling through eBird before I found a blue-winged teal with significant pale coloration in the bill. So I think that this is if you see a bird with a lot of pale in the bill, I think that is a genuine, sign that it's probably a cinnamon. But as always, best to use other marks as well to confirm that. All right, let's move on to green-winged teal. The green-winged teal is our smallest dabbling duck, so quite a bit smaller than even blue-winged or cinnamon teal. The male, of course, is this beautiful, unmistakable duck, that nice green extending behind the eye, reddish face, and that white vertical stripe extending up the breast. And the female, is similar to other ducks, kind of mottled brown, but quite a bit smaller than other ducks. And we'll get to comparing green-winged teal with other ducks in a bit. But I just wanted to mention that green-winged teal is actually more closely related to Northern Pintail than it is to blue-winged or cinnamon teal. Among the ducks we have here, green-winged teal is most closely related to Northern Pintail, which is interesting because a green-winged teal and pintail don't look anything alike. One's our largest duck and one's our smallest duck. There's not really much much that looks similar there. But actually, if you look at the wing, the similarities are quite striking. So on the left here is the wing of a Northern Pintail, and on the right is the wing of a green-winged teal. And you see how similar that is, and then you can kind of see why they're so closely related. They both have these green speculums, kind of bordered by orange at the top and white in the bottom. So just thought that was kind of interesting. And just to compare a green-winged teal versus blue-winged and cinnamon teal in flight, yeah, the good news is they're very, very different in flight. Yeah, green-winged teal has this nice green speculum that's really obvious even at a great distance, while blue-winged teal and cinnamon teal have that nice bluish shoulder patch, those bluish lesser coverts bordered by a thick white bar. And I should say the bird on the screen here on the right is a blue-winged teal. But cinnamon teals, the wing pattern of a cinnamon teal is basically exactly the same. So yeah, this applies to both blue-winged and cinnamon when comparing it to green-winged. But as we saw earlier, this wing pattern is often not visible at rest, so good to know other marks for separating it. First, I would say, yeah, green-winged teal is just significantly smaller than blue-winged teal. But this can be hard to judge on lone birds. It's very obvious in direct comparison, but this can certainly be hard to judge. Green-winged teal also has a steeper forehead, which gives the impression of a rounder head. On that green-winged teal, it feels like the head is very round, and it feels like it would just stuck right onto the body. While blue-winged and cinnamon teal often show, a shallower sloping forehead, and often a little more neck as well. You can often see the neck. Green-winged also has a smaller bill, although bill size is obviously quite variable. And the bill is often a little darker too. In green-winged teal, that bill is often like very jet black, very, very dark. But probably the best thing to look for is to look at the undertail coverts. In green-winged teal, the undertail coverts are white and unstreaked, as we see here. While in blue-winged teal, those undertail coverts have heavy spotting, so they are not unmarked. And yeah, finally, I just wanted to mention that if the bird has eye arcs, that's also a good clue. This blue-winged teal here has some eye arcs. This blue-winged teal has some eye arcs around the eye. Green-winged teals do not have eye arcs, so if you see a bird that has eye arcs, it is not a green-winged teal. But some blue-winged teal do lack eye arcs, so it only goes one way. All right, let's move on to American widgeon. American widgeon is a very common non-breeding visitor to the county. They often form very large flocks on golf courses, parks, etc. They're kind of the highly migratory version of the mallard, if you will. The male widgeon is very much unmistakable with that nice green line extending behind the eye, the nice white crown, kind of chestnut pinkish body overall. The female widgeon is much duller, but thankfully it still has that nice distinct bill pattern, that nice silvery bill with a black tip. And that bill pattern is nothing like other ducks and is very much diagnostic for widgeon. Now we do get another widgeon species here in Southern California, and that's the Eurasian widgeon. Eurasian widgeon is quite rare down here, but usually a few show up in the large widgeon flocks every winter. In the parks and golf courses and the flocks of hundreds of widgeon. There'll often be one or two Eurasians. The male widgeon, or the male Eurasian widgeon, is quite distinct with that nice red head, this kind of pink chest, and a gray body. The female Eurasian widgeon, can look extremely similar to a female American widgeon. And I don't really want to go too much into female widgeon identification. It's not really something I particularly look at, so that's probably a topic best discussed by somebody else. But usually female Eurasian widgeon do show some kind of rufusy tones in the head. The head doesn't contrast with the breast super well. But what I do want to talk about more is a male widgeon, and specifically, hybrid Eurasian and American widgeon. So hybrid American and Eurasian widgeon do happen. And oftentimes, we get widgeon that look like this, that show up in Southern California. They look pretty much like Eurasian widgeon, but they have a little bit of green in the head, and a little bit of green coming down behind the eye. And a lot of people wonder if these birds are hybrids. The answer is probably not, because it's not particularly unusual for Eurasian widgeon to show some green in the head. But a lot of people see these birds, see that little bit of green in the head, and kind of jump to hybrid. I'll just say that more than one of these birds are currently accepted in eBird as hybrids. But that's probably in reality not accurate. These are probably just pure Eurasian widgeon with that just happen to have a little bit of green in the head. Here's what an actual hybrid Eurasian American widgeon looks like. And yeah, the thing you really want to note here is the mixed pink and gray in the flanks. Recall in American widgeon, that body is just kind of pinkish overall, and in Eurasian widgeon, that body is grayish overall. And in hybrids, it's usually a nice mixture of pink and gray throughout the body. And also note the kind of streaking or scalloping in the cheeks, which is another American widgeon feature. Here's another example, pretty similar to the first bird. Just a lot of pink and gray mixing in the body. The kind of streaked cheeks, a lot of scalloping, dark scalloping there. A very classic hybrid. Here's a bird that just based on body alone, it might be acceptable for a pure Eurasian widgeon. But that head is just very intermediate, with tons of green going all the way down the neck, some scalloping, some dark scalloping in the cheeks, a very classic hybrid head pattern. And now this fourth bird here on the lower right, just based on head pattern, you could probably pass that off as a pure Eurasian widgeon. The head is very rufusy overall. But again, look at those flanks. There's a lot of pink in those flanks, which is not acceptable for a pure Eurasian widgeon. And that makes this a hybrid. All right, yeah, let's talk about the Mexican duck now. The Mexican duck is a rare but certainly increasing vagrant to Southern California. Now, just how increasing is pretty startling. Here's a map of Mexican duck records in western Arizona and California from 1900 to 2010. So 110 years. And you can see that they were quite scarce in western Arizona, and there were only a few records from California, from the lower Colorado River Valley. And I think most of these records are from Arizona as well. In fact, the first state record of Mexican duck was not until 2001, and the second state record of Mexican duck was not until 2010. So they are basically unknown, even just 15 years ago. However, in the last 15 years, that same map now looks like this. They've exploded in western Arizona. They're basically expected along the lower Colorado River Valley. And there's now several records for both the Mojave Desert and the coastal slope of Los Angeles, Orange, and San Diego counties. So yeah, they have just absolutely exploded. Now, how much of this is people just looking for them as opposed to an actual range expansion? I'm not totally sure, but I bet it's a lot of both. I think they have genuinely expanded their range further north. But this species was also split from the mallard in 2020. Once you split something, then that really gets people looking for it. So I think that split, in 2020, really caused a lot of people to start looking, and is definitely part of the reason for the increase in records. So how does one identify a Mexican duck? See, on the left here, we have a male Mexican duck, and the confusion species for Mexican duck is generally an eclipse male mallard. They have very similar structures. They have the same wing pattern with that purple speculum bordered by white. But there's several things we can look for. First is the darker body of the Mexican duck. That body really contrasts with the head particularly. There's a paler head, and it really contrasts with that dark breast in the Mexican duck. Also note the dark tail of the Mexican duck. In mallard, that tail is generally very white. There's a lot of white in the tail of a mallard. While in Mexican duck, that tail is just dark. Also note the darker tertials of the Mexican duck. So again, the tertial are these really exposed feathers. And that feather is also very exposed in Mexican duck. But it's significantly darker most of the time. It's kind of a dark brown and is more similar in color to the rest of the wing. While in mallard, that tertial is often kind of a silvery color. Like most things, however, it's not quite that simple, because hybrids are frequent in their native range where both species overlap. Mallards and Mexican ducks hybridize a lot. And this kind of raises a question, like, where is the line between a hybrid and a pure bird? How many mallard-like traits can a quote-unquote pure Mexican duck show? You know, what is that line between hybrid and pure Mexican duck? Well, here's a bird that many of you probably saw at a car park in Huntington Beach a couple years ago. This bird returned for several winters to this park. And this bird was accepted by the CBRC as a pure Mexican duck. However, looking at it very closely, there were some issues with this bird. It did have a lot of white in the tail, which is a mallard trait. In an ideal world, a Mexican duck should not show that much white in the tail. And likewise, it had a reddish tinge to the breast, which is also a mallard trait. But the CBRC decided this was within range of what they consider a pure Mexican duck, and accepted it as such. Here's another example of an interesting bird. This one's from Desert Center in Riverside, and this one was also accepted by the CBRC. Like the previous bird, this bird does have some problems as well. Note that curled tail feather, that little tail feather kind of sticking up from the rest of the tail. That's a mallard trait, and ideally should not happen in a 100% pure Mexican duck. There's also a lot of green in the crown of this bird, which is also a mallard trait. But like the last bird, the CBRC decided this was within range of variation for what they would consider a pure Mexican duck, and accepted it as such. Now here's a bird from San Luis Obispo County. Now this bird was rejected by the CBRC, so they did not consider this a pure Mexican duck. But to me, this bird looks very similar to the one we just looked at, to the Desert Center bird. Now they both kind of have the same issues. Oops, sorry. They have this, this bird has this, again, like this curled tail feather kind of sticking up from the rest of the tail, which is a mallard trait. It also has a lot of kind of darkish on the crown, very similar to that bird we just looked at. To me, this has the same problems. I suppose you could also argue that, maybe the breast is a little reddish on this bird as well. But, to me, I'm not seeing a great amount of difference between the Desert Center bird and this bird. And remember, the CBRC accepted this one, and they rejected this one. This is not at all meant as a bash on the CBRC. I think I'm just saying that I'm not really sure where that line is between a hybrid and a pure Mexican duck. It seems like maybe 90%, of the features line up for Mexican duck. That's okay, but 85% might be too low. I'm not totally sure what that line is. And yeah, I think also maybe the CBRC would just maybe being a little more cautious with this bird because San Luis Obispo was significantly more out of its range compared to Desert Center. I think this would have been the furthest north record for the state at the time, and certainly the furthest west. So they may just wanted to have been more cautious. But still, I'm not totally sure where that line is. So yeah, I think somebody needs to make a Mexican duck scale. We have the gel scale for oyster catchers. Yeah, somebody needs to make a Mexican duck scale so we can figure out what's a hybrid and what's a pure Mexican duck. All right, anyhow, the last species I want to talk about is gargony. Gargony is a very rare old world vagrant. There's just one Los Angeles County record, which was March 19th, 1973, a long time ago from El Dorado Park. Although there's just one record, there has been others in Southern California quite recently. There was one at the Salton Sea a few years ago, and one in Santa Barbara a few years ago. So it seems like only a matter of time before LA County gets another one. So definitely good to be on the lookout. The male gargony is striking and unmistakable with that nice white line extending behind the eye. There's that chestnut cheek, gray flanks. Just a very striking duck. The female and eclipsed male can certainly be similar to a green-winged teal. It's very similar, and the gargonies are quite similar in size to a green-winged teal. So here, for example, is the Salton Seabird with a blue-winged teal. So yeah, the gargony is this bird here in the front, and the blue-winged teal is a bird in the back. And you can see it's substantially smaller than the blue-winged teal, much more similar in size to a green-winged teal. And also note just the much bolder face pattern of the gargany compared to the blue-winged teal. So let's compare gargany and green-winged teal. It's actually usually pretty straightforward. Just note the much bolder face pattern of the gargany. Gargany usually has a bold white supercilium, a bold dark eye line, a very dark crown. And it also often has this kind of second line running through the middle of the cheek. That kind of dark line running through the otherwise pale cheek. And that face pattern just much duller in green-winged teal. Also note the longer neck of the gargany. On the green-winged teal, it looks like that face was just plopped right onto the body. Not really much of a neck there. But in gargany, that neck is usually quite visible. But, green-winged teal are quite variable, and some green-winged teal can have fairly bold face patterns. So here's an example of this is a green-winged teal here on the slide. But when it was found, many people were trying to turn it into a gargany. And, at first glance, you might be inclined to think it is a gargany because, it does have that kind of dark line extending down through the cheek. It has a pretty dark crown, but, the real gargany almost always jumps out. Here's a real gargany. Just a much bolder supercilium, a much paler throat, and just a darker bird overall. Garganies are just generally darker on the body than a green-winged teal. And also note that neck, that exposed neck of the gargany. While green-winged teal, that head looks like it's just plopped right onto the body. Also note the streaked undertail coverts of the gargany. Or recall from a previous slide that those undertail coverts of green-winged teal are unstreaked. So that's another great way to tell them apart. All right, I wanted to end by just talking about a few fun hybrids, because hybridization in ducks is quite frequent. And we get a lot of hybrids. One of the more common hybrid combinations in ducks is a Gadwall and Mallard. And here's an example of this. The nice thing about hybrid ducks is usually, they do look kind of halfway between the two species. And this bird here is no exception. I'd say the body is probably mostly like a Gadwall, kind of grayish overall, with that black vent. But the face pattern is very much intermediate, with that green crown and green throat of the Mallard, and that kind of pale cheek of the Gadwall. Here's another example of a hybrid Gadwall and Mallard. These hybrids can be quite variable, which is pretty cool. Again, the body is most like a Gadwall, very gray with the black vent. The head has some green in it, but the head is mostly chestnut, which is kind of interesting because neither parent species has a chestnut head. And also note that really funky bill color. In male plumage, neither Mallard nor Gadwall should show a yellow bill, and yet the hybrids often do for some reason. So yeah, definitely interesting. Here's another example of a hybrid duck, and probably the first thing that catches your eye is this kind of whitish crescent between the eye and the bill, much like a blue-winged teal. And this might incline you to believe that blue-winged teal is one of the parents here. This is actually a cinnamon teal northern shoveler hybrid. So yeah, again, we see a trait that neither parent species have, but it's really well displayed in the hybrid, that nice white crescent. For reference, here's what a blue-winged teal shoveler hybrid looks like. Note that white crescent is much bolder, much longer, much wider. But really the best way to tell these two hybrids apart is to look at the breast. In cinnamon teal northern shoveler hybrid, that breast is kind of unmarked chestnut, similar in color to the rest of the underparts. While in blue-winged teal, those underparts are kind of mottled or kind of speckled dark and contrast very nicely with the flanks. Finally, here's a cinnamon blue-winged teal hybrid. The nice thing about these hybrids, they generally look very much intermediate between cinnamon and blue-winged teal. The body is very cinnamony overall, but it has those, spots throughout the body like a blue-winged teal. The face pattern is also quite intermediate, kind of a hint of a white crescent and mixed greenish and a cinnamon in the face. So not quite intermediate. Cool, that's all I have today. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
That was wonderful, Desi. Thank you very, very much. If you have a question, please pop it into the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. It kind of will help us keep track of questions we've answered or Desi has answered. And Mark, do you have any questions already for Desi? I know that a couple are burning in my craw.
Where's your craw?
Well, it's off camera at the moment, so.
Oh, okay. Just wondering what part the craw was. Yeah, I guess one question that I have is I noticed that all those really cool hybrids that you showed, which were really cool,
Yeah,
were all males. Is there any hope in figuring out female hybrids?
I would say forget about it. I mean, I did look in eBird, and there are like a couple like cinnamon teal shoveler hybrids that were like definitely kind of obvious. Like they had, a huge bill like a shoveler, but a wing pattern like a cinnamon teal. So if you get like a very good look at it and great photos, I suppose you could do it, kind of guess at it, but it's not doctor recommended.
With dogs, Desi, with dogs, you're able to take a cheek swab or whatever and send it into a lab, and they'll kind of tell you what breeds may be involved. Do we have any way of getting cheek swabs or samples to determine hybridization?
We certainly do. Well, in birds, we generally take some part of the foot, like kind of the toe pad. And yeah, we
Okay.
certainly do have labs that can analyze that and spit out, this is 99.765% of what we know is a cinnamon teal and 85.481% of what's a blue-winged teal. So we certainly do have that. As for I don't think it's particularly open to the just recreational birder right now, but I think it should be. I think birders should be able to do that more often.
Well, no, I actually was kind of thinking about that one, that the hybrid that kind of had the blue-winged teal slash through the face, but
Yeah, the
was
cinnamon
not
shoveler
was
hybrid.
right,
Yeah.
but was not a blue-winged teal. Well, how do you know that? It was my question that popped into my head.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think we know that because, we have a very like when we see birds like that, we have a very distinct, set of two birds where one of them has a chestnut breast and one of them has a spotted breast. And I
Right.
think we know that shoveler's involved, and we kind of assume, these are two different parents involved. One has to be cinnamon, one has to be blue-wing. I suppose it
Okay.
could be like, maybe two variants of a blue-winged teal shoveler hybrid, but I think it's
Yeah.
consistent enough to the point where, we know two different species are involved.
Right. Interesting. Mark, we have some
Well,
questions.
we do. So let's see. So Lily asked to have blue-wing and cinnamon teal hybridized.
Yeah, that was the last slide of the talk. Yeah,
Hmm.
they do. It's one of the more common hybrids in ducks. The nice thing is, yeah, they look pretty much intermediate between the two species.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But forget about the females.
Oh, well, that one,
Because
yes.
those are hard enough without hybrids.
Right, exactly.
Cool, thank you. Gabriel asks, how easy is it to see duck hybrids in LA?
Yeah, you definitely have to look at a lot of ducks before you see a hybrid. That's for sure. They are quite rare. I know there was a hybrid Mallard Gadwall that lived at Madrona Marsh for a while, but I think that's probably gone. There's often hybrids if you go to the Salton Sea headquarters pond on the north shore of the Salton Sea. There's often hybrid teal in there, often hybrid shoveler and a teal as well. So yeah, hard to see in LA, but if you want to see hybrid ducks, go to the Salton Sea headquarters.
Great. Thank you. And Gabriel also asks, can you see dabbling ducks during the summer in Southern California?
You certainly can. The vast majority of dabbling ducks migrate north during the summer, but there are, usually there are a few to several that do spend the summer in the LA basin. So yeah, in the LA River or the San Gabriel River, there often are some over summering ducks. And if you go further north to say Lancaster, Paiute Ponds, now you're getting further north enough and into the desert where you're in the breeding range of a lot of these ducks. So birds like shoveler, pintail, and cinnamon teal have all bred at Paiute Ponds, and they don't breed on the coastal slope. So yeah, definitely go north if you want to see dabbling ducks during the summer.
Great, thanks.
Great, thank you. Karen asks, what happens when two hybrids get together?
I'm not sure about that, but I was looking at a really cool picture of I think it was a photo. It was a photo it was a photo from a hunter who had shot a duck somewhere, and I think they determined it to be a hybrid mallard pintail crossed back with a mallard. So certainly the hybrids, yeah, they seem to be fertile. Like they seem to be able to mate with other, pure birds, and yeah. So I think that probably goes on forever, and that might explain why we see these kind of 90% Mexican ducks. It probably started with a mallard Mexican duck hybrid, and then it bred with a Mexican duck and bred with a Mexican duck. You get to the point where it's you have 95% of a Mexican duck, but there's still a couple mallard traits in there.
There's still that tail feather that curls up.
Exactly.
Yep. One little tail feather. Messes everything up for all these birders. Gabriel asked, I've heard you can see cinnamon teal, northern shovelers, and gadwalls in the summer, but where?
No.
Yeah, Paiute Ponds for sure. Definitely the best place to see ducks in summer. The LA River at Willow Street can also be good. There's usually summering cinnamon teal there.
Another question from Mickey: can hybrids mate successfully?
Yeah, I don't know about two hybrids, but certainly a hybrid and a pure bird can mate successfully.
Question from Ben. I know this is on dabbling ducks, but do we see hybridization in diving ducks? Have we seen any dabbling cross diving hybrids?
No, we certainly have not seen a dabbling diving duck hybrid in the wild. That being said, basically every combination of diving duck hybrid has happened. Ringneck duck and scaup in particular are quite regular in very large scaup rafts. Ringneck or scaup redhead has also happened. Yeah, pretty much every combination has happened in diving ducks, but no, I don't think it's happened yet between a dabbling and a diving duck.
Not that we know of.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Gabriel asks, are wood and mandarin ducks easy to see?
I would say in Los Angeles County, no, they are not very easy to see. For wood duck, yeah, Franklin Canyon Park is probably the best place for them. Yeah, so go there and you'll probably see 3 or 4 wood ducks.
Yeah,
Mandarin duck, I'm not sure there's any currently in LA County. I think the ones at Almanza Park may have died.
Yeah,
but there still are mandarin ducks at Irvine Regional Park in Orange County. So if you want to see mandarin ducks, yeah, go to Irvine Regional Park in Orange County.
I think there's wood ducks at Miss Scanzo Gardens now.
Oh, cool.
And there's one at Apollo Park in Lancaster.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
And the pond at the Arboretum or the lake at the Arboretum is going through reconstruction, so it's gone.
Okay. And that used to have wood ducks regularly, and mandarin duck occasionally.
Cool.
But the best thing to do is look in eBird, and and that will let you You can even click
Know
on a
where the
map and
bird
it'll show you
weddings
where.
are.
Yeah. I see Lance also asked about what about
Oh.
using vocalizations to identify ducks? Some of these species are relatively vocal and make distinctly different sounds. Certainly could be useful for people doing big days starting at midnight.
Who would we be talking about there?
I don't know. Yeah, certainly. No, duck vocalizations are certainly good to know. I mean, they're not like super useful in terms of like in relation to other birds and the usefulness of vocalizations. But yeah, certainly green-winged teals give a very distinctive sound, as do pintails. I think mallards and gadwalls both quack, and I think that
Right.
quack.
They kind of have a
very-
different quack.
They have a different quack. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely good to listen to some recordings on that.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Dessi, thank you very much. This has been a wonderful presentation. And yeah, the more that we are exposed in different ways, especially with female ducks and all that, it's helpful for everyone. Thank you again. We really
Yeah.
appreciate
Female ducks are very difficult.
it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah.
Yes.
Always
Thank you
fun
so
to meet
much.
myself.
Great
Thanks, Desi.
presentation.
It was great. Very well presented. Very educational.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great
Absolutely.
presentation, Desi. Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
Alex.
Yeah,
And
thanks for the introduction. That was very kind of you.
oh, no. Please, you always have an open door.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
believe-
Next time you want to do a webinar about anything you want,
Yeah.
you know, just let
So
us know.
duck-wise.
Or, yeah,
At least.
we need one on diving ducks now.
Well, there you go. When are you going to do it?
No, not until 2026.
It's
Okay.
coming up. Please join us next month for Diego Blanco's presentation, and which will be very interesting on the evolution of certain birds. And until then, we will see you out in the field or wherever. Anyways, take
Yep.
care, everyone. Have a good evening.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Happy
Thanks,
Lunar New
Steve.
Year.
Yep.
Happy
Good
New
night.
Year.
And
Good
Bye.
evening.
thank you, Desi.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.